Andronicus, the younger brother of Emperor John the Beautiful, is one of the most conspicuous characters of the age, and his genuine adventures might form the subject of a very singular romance. To justify the choice of three ladies of royal birth, it is incumbent on me to observe that their fortunate lover was cast in the best proportions of strength and beauty, and that the want of soft graces was supplied by a manly countenance, a lofty stature, athletic muscles, and the air and deportment of a soldier. The preservation in his old age of health and vigor was the reward of temperance and exercise. A piece of bread and a draught of water was often his sole and evening repast, and if he tasted of a wild boar or stag, which he had roasted with his own hands, it was the well-earned fruit of a laborious chase. Dexterous in arms, he was ignorant of fear. His persuasive eloquence could bend to every situation and character of life. His style, though not as practiced, was fashioned by the example of St. Paul, and in every deed of mischief he had a heart to resolve, the head to contrive, and the hand to execute. In his youth, after the death of the Emperor John, he followed the retreat of the Roman army, but in the march through Asia Minor, design or accident tempted him to wander into the mountains. The hunter was encompassed by the Turkish huntsmen, and he remained some time a reluctant or willing captive in the power of the Sultan. His virtues and vices recommended him to the favor of his cousin. He shared the perils and the pleasures of Manuel. He pressed, with active valor, the siege of Mopsuestia. The day was employed in the boldest of attacks, but the night was wasted in song and dance, and a band of Greek comedians formed the choicest part of his advisers. Andronicus was surprised by the sally of a valiant foe, but, while his troops fled in disorder, his invincible lance transpierced the thickest ranks of the Armenians. On his return to the imperial camp in Macedonia, he received by Manuel with public smiles and a private reproof. But the Duchess of Nicias, Brandisium, and Castoria were the reward or consolation of the unsuccessful general. At midnight, their tent was suddenly attacked by his lover's angry brothers, impatient to expiate her infamy in his blood. His daring spirit refused her advice, and the disguise of a female habit, and boldly starting from his couch, he drew his sword and cut his way through the numerous assassins. It was here that he first betrayed his ingratitude and treachery. He engaged in a treasonable correspondence with the King of Hungary and the German Emperor, approached the royal tent at a suspicious hour with a drawn sword, and, under the mask of a Latin soldier, avowed an intention of revenge against a mortal foe, and imprudently praised the fleetness of his horse as an instrument of flight and safety. The monarch dissembled his suspicions, but, after the close of the campaign, Andronicus was arrested and strictly confined in the tower of the Palace of Constantinople. In this prison, he was left about 12 years, a most painful restraint from which the thirst of action and pleasure perpetually urged him to escape. Alone and pensive, he perceived some broken bricks in the corner of the chamber, and gradually widened the passage, till he had explored a dark and forgotten recess. Into this hole he conveyed himself, and the remains of his provisions, replacing the bricks in their former position, and erasing with care the footsteps of his retreat. At the hour of the customary visit, his guards were amazed by the silence and solitude of the prisoner, and reported, with shame and fear, his incomprehensible flight. The gates of the palace and the city were instantly shut. The strictest orders were dispatched into the provinces for the recovery of the fugitive, and his wife, on the suspicion of a pious act, was basely imprisoned in the same tower. At the dead of night she beheld a spectre. She recognized her husband, they shared their provisions, and the son was the fruit of these stolen interviews, which alleviated the tediousness of their confinement. In the custody of a woman, the vigilance of the keepers was insensibly relaxed, and the captive had accomplished his real escape, when he was discovered, brought back to Constantinople, and loaded with a double chain. At length he found the moment and the means of his deliverance. A boy, his domestic servant, intoxicated the guards, and obtained the wax of an impression of the key. By the diligence of his friends, a similar key, with bundles of rope, was introduced into the prison, in the bottom of a hogshead. Andronicus employed, with industry and courage, the instruments of his safety, unlocked the doors, descended from the tower, concealed himself all day among the bushes, and scaled in the night the garden wall of the palace. A boat was stationed for his reception. He visited his own house, embraced his children, cast away his chain, mounted a fleet horse, and directed his rapid course toward the banks of the Danube. In his escape, he made his way to Russia, where the emperor wanted them to fight alongside him. No sooner was the exile restored to freedom in his country than his ambition revived, at first to his own, and at length to the public, misfortune. The daughter of Manuel was a feeble bar to the succession of the more deserving males of the Comnenian blood. Her future marriage with the Prince of Hungary was repugnant to the hopes or prejudices of the prince and nobles, but with an oath of allegiance was required to the presumptive heir. Andronicus alone asserted the honor of the Roman name, declined the unlawful engagement, and boldly protested against the adoption of a stranger. His patriotism was offensive to the emperor, but he spoke the sentiments of the people, and was removed from the royal presence by an honorable banishment. But Andronicus soon discovered a more easy and pleasing conquest, the beautiful Philippa, sister of the Empress Maria, and daughter of Raymond of Ponthieu, the Latin prince of Antioch. For her sake, he deserted his station, and wasted the summer in balls and tournaments. To his love, she sacrificed her innocence, her reputation, and the offer of an advantageous marriage. But the resentment of Manuel for this domestic affront interrupted his pleasures. Andronicus left the indiscreet princess to weep and to repent, and, with a band of desperate adventurers, undertook the pilgrimage to Jerusalem.